On this Saturday night, remembering a real-life superhero. The world pays tribute to trailblazing movie star Chadwick Boseman.
Chadwick can be depicted as a superhero in film and a superhero in real life.
Rallies across the country renew calls to defund the police. The U.S. president promises help for hurricane-hammered states as residents turn to the colossal cleanup. Plus, a super discovery.
I mean, that's very rare.
This Canadian comic book collection is in a class of its own.
Global National with Robin Gill. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Reaction is pouring in from around the world to the heartbreaking news out of Hollywood. Chadwick Boseman, the American actor who broke new ground with the blockbuster film Black Panther, has had his remarkable career cut short. Boseman's family revealed last night that the 43-year-old died after a secret battle with colon cancer. The news shocked the film industry and the legions of young fans now mourning a movie star who devoted his career to breaking down racial barriers. Most knew him best as the king of Wakanda. Wakanda forever! Chadwick Boseman's starring role in the 2018 Marvel movie Black Panther, which raked in more than $1 billion and received an Oscar nomination for Best Picture. It was also the first major black superhero movie.
It's not just a movie, it's become its own thing. It's a movement. People are excited about the cultural aspect of it. People are excited about seeing something new.
He put himself on a different level.
This Toronto community worker was part of a fundraising campaign that paid for hundreds of black Canadian youth to see the movie in theaters.
The Black Panther movie showcased more than just a portrayal of black superheroes. It was showing us a world where technology was guided by black thought, black creativity, and exclusively black people. And that was a very positive image to showcase to youth.
Give me a number on my back. I'll give you the guts.
Boseman promoted that positive image, playing black pioneers such as Jackie Robinson, who broke baseball's color barrier.
Man is an attorney. You will treat him with the respect that he deserves.
And Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American justice to serve on the Supreme Court.
He actually was culturally aware of the roles he was taking on, positive roles that was going to make an impact on so many.
And his superhuman spirit was also deployed through his charitable work. He recently announced a $4 million donation for hospitals fighting the pandemic in African-American communities.
The African-American community has been hit the hardest.
And he spent time visiting his youngest fans in hospital, including some with terminal cancer, who were hoping they'd get to see his movie.
Yeah, it means a lot.
What his fans didn't know was that Boseman was quietly fighting his own battle. Diagnosed with colon cancer in 2016, on Friday, it claimed his life. News of his death sparked an international outpouring of grief and tributes. Barack Obama recalled their meeting in 2016, saying Boseman used his power to give kids heroes to look up to.
Chadwick can be depicted as a superhero in film and a superhero in real life.
Chadwick Boseman was 43.
As well as the loss of actor Chadwick Boseman, a close friend of the NBA who appeared in iconic movies.
And the NBA held a moment of silence for Chadwick Boseman as the playoffs resumed in the wake of the police shooting of Jacob Blake. Players with the Orlando Magic and Milwaukee Bucks, Blake's home team, took a knee, wearing shirts with the slogan Black Lives Matter during the U.S. national anthem. In an earlier statement, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said the league will immediately establish a social justice coalition, increasing access to voting, promoting civic engagement, and advocating for meaningful police and criminal justice reform. The Raptors return to the court tomorrow, but no NBA games are scheduled beyond Sunday at this point. Meanwhile, the Vancouver Canucks are back on the ice tonight.
No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace! No justice!
Meanwhile, family members of Jacob Blake are leading a march today, calling for an end to police violence. Protesters have marched on Kenosha streets every night since Blake was shot in the back 7 times by a police officer last Sunday. He's now paralyzed from the waist down. And rallies were also held in cities across Canada, calling on their local officials to defund police and invest in social services. Morganne Campbell has more on whether those calls are being answered.
Those people are with us and we're with them.
An example of strength in numbers across Canada, people gathering with a common purpose to invoke change.
It's heartwarming to see that there's more people there's other people who actually care.
The Coalition for BIPOC Liberation held a nationwide day of action in several cities Saturday, including Toronto, Montreal, Moncton, and Calgary, calling for municipalities and regions to cut their police budgets by at least half and reinvest that money in social services and communities.
It's actually not such a radical extremist idea. It's actually something that's been happening for years.
To approach things with kindness and compassion and give people access to resources to rehabilitate themselves.
The movement has gained momentum over recent months following the death of George Floyd during an altercation with Minneapolis police and several other high-profile cases in Canada.
We are confronting structural changes. These are questions of how we lead police, how we manage police, how we govern police, the transparency of police.
A long-awaited bill that would see oversight amongst the RCMP and the Canadian Border Services Agency has failed to clear the Senate twice. In Edmonton, the police budget has been cut by $11 million, with funds redirected to social services and housing. Toronto voted against a 10% cut to its police budget. However, its force recently adopted the use of body cameras, a measure which critics say isn't necessarily a step in the right direction.
It puts the attention on the individual sworn members instead of asking the broader structural problems that I think ultimately the defund movement is trying to lay bare.
Activists say much of the concern also involves the issue of systemic racism, and current measures aren't evolving fast enough.
It takes a lot out of you, and it takes a lot for you to do your natural everyday stuff with this stuff in the back of your mind.
Morganne Campbell, Global News.
And as the rally in Montreal was wrapping up, protesters toppled a statue of John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister. That statue has been the frequent target of vandalism in recent years, with protesters citing Macdonald's treatment of Indigenous people. And politicians across Canada are facing pressure to address systemic racism. That includes recently elected Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. He sat down with our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson to discuss his views.
Tomorrow on the West Block, we sit down with new Conservative leader Erin O'Toole for his exclusive first television interview with the West Block on Global News. One of the biggest stories this summer have been the Black Lives Matter marches and protests as the nation struggles with issues of systemic racism, inequality, and what to do about it. We asked the man who would like to be Prime Minister what his views are on whether or not systemic racism exists in Canadian government institutions and in the RCMP. Here's what he told me.
I'm always going to say, I think there is racism and I want to stamp it out. But I wore a uniform. I fight for people that wear a uniform. And when you use a term like systemic, some of those people feel that you're calling them racist. So can we improve community-based policing? Can we improve training? Can we make sure that communities that are losing faith in the public services or the RCMP can have that faith restored? I'd invite you, what is the definition of systemic racism? There is no definition. It's tossed around.
With the concerns about anti-Black racism in the United States and right here in Canada, this is not an issue that will go away for any Canadian leader, and for a Conservative leader who says that he wants to have a big tent in Canadians of all backgrounds and identities feeling comfortable, it is something that Canadian politicians will have to seriously address. Mercedes Stephenson, Global News, Toronto.
Protesters also took to the streets of Ottawa and several European capitals today, rallying against public health measures meant to stem the spread of COVID-19. As David Aiken reports, these protests come as Canada and some European countries are watching their COVID-19 cases climb.
We're here to draw the line with you today.
On Parliament Hill, a few hundred protesters gathered amid some gray drizzle. There were Trump supporters, for example, Quebec nationalists, but also a strong presence of those bearing the symbols of QAnon, That's a baseless conspiracy theory that, among other things, believes that the world's elites are operating a global pedophile ring and that only Donald Trump can do anything about it. But whether it's QAnon or others in this crowd, they are united by a distrust of the government, the police, and the media, and a belief that scientists are not telling the truth.
So we're going to want to talk about everything from Satanism, you name it, pedophilia, mask mandates, injections, mandatory vaccinations, anything that people want to talk about when it pertains to this latest lockdown pandemic.
Civil authorities in Canada and around the world are grappling with strategies to deal with these kind of protesters. In Paris, these protesters railed against COVID-19 restrictions, even though France hit a near record high number of new cases on Friday. And the fact that the United Kingdom leads all of Europe in COVID-19 deaths with more than 41,000 did not move this protester.
The main reason why I'm here is that the severity of COVID has been blown out of proportion, so the measures that are in place are unnecessary.
And yet, public health officials around the world, including Canada, unanimously recommend social distancing and wearing a mask to help stem the spread of the virus.
I would advocate people to wear a mask, and it would be an added layer of protection.
The number of new Canadian cases reported every day has remained relatively stable and relatively low throughout most of the summer. But Canada's Public Health Agency reported on Saturday that the average number of new cases reported across the country in the last week ticked up to 425 cases a day. That's compared to 400 cases a day in the previous week. Jeff.
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thanks, David. The American president touched down in Louisiana and Texas today to see firsthand the destruction left by Hurricane Laura. At least 16 people are dead, and thousands of homes and businesses have been destroyed. And as Jennifer Johnson reports, Trump is now promising to help residents rebuild.
Aerial footage shows what is left of Cameron, Louisiana, after Hurricane Laura made landfall and tore apart the small town. Throughout parts of the state, the National Guard is still extracting citizens left stranded by the powerful storm. In many areas, there is no food, electricity, or water, and it could stay that way for weeks.
It's a war zone. It really is. It looks like a tornado came through more than a hurricane.
U.S. President Donald Trump spent Saturday viewing the devastation in both Louisiana and Texas, pledging billions to help both states recover. The president started his tour in one of the hardest hit areas, Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Yesterday I approved a major disaster declaration that helps individuals and business owners. FEMA has delivered 2.6 million liters of water and 1.4 million meals.
Local officials say ongoing power outages are threatening the health and safety of the sick and elderly.
That's causing us to have a rolling series of evacuations that we're having to do from nursing homes and from hospitals.
Customs officers are going door to door looking for survivors. For thousands of homeowners, it's time to get out the chainsaws and clean up. For others, it's facing the reality that everything is gone.
It's sad, but we made it. And me and my husband and my 2 dogs, we made it alive.
15 years ago, on this date, Hurricane Katrina, the costliest storm in U.S. history, hit coastal Louisiana. The economic impact of Laura is not expected to reach that level, but it will take months to get back to normal. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Coming up, the pleas for provincial help as a heat wave hammers PEI's potato farms. Welcome back. Farmers in Prince Edward Island are struggling to deal with more than just the pandemic. Severe drought conditions and record low rainfall are devastating potato growers. As Jesse Thomas reports, they're now pleading with the province for help.
Potato farmers on Prince Edward Island grow on average 2.5 billion pounds of potatoes per year. This year, their crops are in jeopardy as most of the province struggles under severe drought conditions.
It's historically dry across the province.
To make matters worse, Godfrey says this is the fourth straight summer where dry conditions have hampered the growing season, cutting into farmers' yields and profits.
I would say this is the worst year that we've seen, actually, probably since 2001.
Following the 2001 drought, PEI implemented a ban on drilling and use of high-capacity wells for irrigation use on farms. Godfrey says that needs to change. He says the ban is discriminatory and harmful to farmers.
You are able to get a high-capacity well for water access, and you can irrigate if you have a golf course, for example. If you're building a car wash, you can get a high-capacity well, but if you want to irrigate crops, grow food, you can't.
Greg Donald with the PEI Potato Board agrees and says the moratorium on agricultural irrigation needs to be suspended.
We're getting hotter, higher temperatures, longer periods without rain, wind, and irrigation is another tool that we need in addition to those.
In Nova Scotia, dry, hot conditions are making for a tough summer for many farmers, but there is one crop that's thriving.
Grapes need about half the water than a lot of other crops need, so we're doing great. It's looking like it could be a great finish this year.
There is one big challenge this year, though. COVID-19 has created a labor shortage at vineyards across the region. Come harvest time, Els will be short 4 temporary foreign workers.
We have made it up with local workers, and they're doing a great job, but we're still just missing those experienced professional hands.
The PEI Federation of Agriculture say they met with Premier Dennis King last week and will meet again this week to examine irrigation opportunities. In the meantime, they'll hold out hope for rain. Jesse Thomas, Global News, Sheffield Mills, Nova Scotia.
Still ahead, why pandemic restrictions are turning European travelers topsy-turvy. Welcome back. This summer, most Canadians opted to vacation at home or travel within the country. But Canada is very big, of course, similar in size to all of Europe, which is home to more than 50 countries. And Europeans are now struggling to navigate a constantly changing landscape of travel restrictions. Redmond Shannon reports from London.
In normal times, Europe is a dream for travellers. Open borders, cheap flights and fast trains. But ever since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the rules have changed. In fact, they've never stopped changing. Countries across Europe are imposing sudden mandatory self-isolation rules on people travelling from virus hotspots, often with little notice.
But yeah, rather be here in time than have to quarantine for 2 weeks.
On Thursday, Germany asked its citizens to stop travelling to at-risk countries. But what if you're already on holiday? A lot can change during a 2-week vacation.
We asked before we came, and it was a green zone, but no, it's a risk zone.
Even Britain's Transport Secretary was forced to isolate when the rules changed during his vacation to Spain. Travellers are keeping a close eye on this COVID-19 case map. Yellow regions are generally safe to return from, but coming from a brown area means you might have to self-isolate. But each country has a different threshold. And the sudden rule changes have caused diplomatic tension.
We appeal to UK government to replace this 14 days quarantine measure by reliable tests.
With so many people wary of travel, tourist meccas like Venice are almost empty.
We went into the Doge's Palace and we went into one of the main museums to see a Tintoretto. And I kid you not, there must have been 12 people instead of 1,000. When I put my tourist hat on, it was amazing. You know, it was like such a wonderful experience just walking around the city without massive crowds.
But it's been devastating for the tourism industry, and for the foreseeable future, travelling abroad will be a roll of the dice.
To say that this is frustrating and confusing is to put it mildly. But if I was to be generous to the health officials, I would say is that, well, I don't know what else they can do.
Having those rules is one thing, abiding by them is another. The EU's Trade Commissioner was forced to resign this week after failing to self-isolate on a trip home to Ireland. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Up next, why this Canadian collection of superhero stories just received super rare status. Welcome back. From billion-dollar movies to blockbuster conventions, comic books play a supersized role in our popular culture, and now a rare comic collection has turned up in Canada. Jennifer Palma explains.
3 absolutely incredible comics.
Actually, only 3 of 1,300. They're part of a personal collection dating back from the 1940s to the early 60s.
That was my Super Bowl.
Patrick Chauncey, owner of Golden Age Collectibles, says he became aware of the rare comics in 1999. A man called him saying his in-laws died, and while cleaning their home, he found a huge stack of comics in a cupboard. He had no idea his father-in-law was an avid collector, and he used the comics as a way to improve his English skills.
He was a Chinese gentleman who worked for the CP Ferries. I understand he was a cook, and one of the neat things about the collection is I found some photos at the Vancouver Archives taken by Jack Lindsay that show some of the newsstands where he actually bought some of the comics from.
Chauncey knew he was onto something big and bought them all for an undisclosed amount of money. Not only were the comics in great condition, some had unique markings on them, both handwritten and stamps.
The coolest one is what I understand is called a chop, and it's like a personal representation symbol. So it's something that he would have designed himself.
The comics have been graded and deemed a pedigree, meaning they are very rare and valuable.
It's a very famous cover.
This edition of Captain America stands out. It's been graded at an 8 out of 10 by the Certified Guarantee Company. So what's the value? Well, the same comic, graded at 7.5, sold for $23,000 earlier this year. A significant amount of the comics in the collection dubbed Chinatown grade even higher, so there's no telling how much they're all worth.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, that's very rare. I mean, to come across something like that. Pedigree, right?
Just the uniqueness of it with the symbols attached to it and just the story behind it is really cool. And yeah, it's a great thing to have.
Some are considered to be from the golden age of comics. That's something not lost on Chauncey. For now, he's holding on to them.
You got to keep something, you know, when you get a collection like this.
Jennifer Palma, Global News, Vancouver.
And that is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia. To share your Canada with us, email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you back here again tomorrow. Have a great night.